than the recommended, than what the Medical Association was recommending. And so because of that, I thought that was pretty interesting how we see adoption rates fluctuate as a result. Okay, let's talk about characteristics of this particular innovation. As far as the compatibility, the fact that you do have the animal and human strains are similar. For example, when we talked about tuberculosis or smallpox, we were able to take strains from one or the other and develop a vaccine for the other as a result. Also, what makes it compatible is that zoonotic diseases, which are diseases that can affect both humans and animals, can use the same vaccination. Another thing that makes vaccines compatible in animals is the fact that it's interchangeable among species. Now, this is not always the case, but an example would be like CDT can be used in both goats and sheep. Okay, let's talk about complexity. Now, complexity can occur especially when vaccines are being developed. For example, when vaccines are first beginning to, in the beginning stages, the degree of weakness, for example, should the strain be killed? Should the strain be just weakened or aged? Or should the strain be heated? All of those ideas and concepts will have to go through experimental stages to determine what is the best route in developing this vaccine. You know, if the antigen is killed completely, or if the virus is killed completely, the antigen may not be functionable in the body once it's injected, and therefore no antibodies are created. You definitely don't want that to occur. So there's a series of experiments that one must go through to determine what's the feasible route for developing the vaccine as far as the culture goes. The fact that immunity is pretty easy to understand, it's kind of a do or don't thing, also makes this a little easier as far as digestible to the community. When you're looking at, for example, the West Nile disease, when it first hit in the equine industry, that adoption rate ran rampant through because it's a do or don't. I mean, you're either going to inoculate your animal or you're not. And so because of that, the complexity isn't so intense as far as just the basic understanding of immunity and the need for it. One thing that might be considered complex about this innovation is that restraints are required. Not all the time, but when you're talking about injecting an animal, you're gonna want to restrain them in some fashion. Depending on what species you're talking about, some restraints are more required than others. Another thing that makes it less complex is the fact that you can buy the virus and store it. For example, if you're buying the Pasteurella pneumonia vaccine for sheep, you would just store that powdered format until you're ready to use it. Simply add saline solution, and then it becomes viable for 6 days. And so, because of that, because of that reason, producers have the ability to purchase that and then store it for longer periods of time, making that less complex for them. Now, let me back up for just a minute. I realize that some of these complexities are dealing with something that makes the virus complex and something that doesn't make it as complex for the producer. Let me go back and highlight that real quick. The degree of weakness would make it complex for the development stages. The understanding of immunity would not make it complex for the individual, for the producer. Restraints required would probably make it complex for the producer, but nothing out of the ordinary for any type of treatment options. And then the fact that you could store it for long periods of time makes it not complex for the producer. I'm sorry I threw those in together, but I felt like we did have both some complexity issues and some non-complexity issues. Now, let's move on to triability. Triability, like we said earlier, unfortunately it's a do or don't. So there's no like trial option, hey, you have the opportunity to vaccinate your animal to see if you like it or not. If you choose to not, and then your animal's exposed to, for example, West Nile, then that's going to be a downfall for your program. So as far as triability, looking at it this angle might work. Once you vaccinate, it's kind of a lifetime deal. Depending on the vaccinations, though, for example, like CDT, a booster is required 14 days after the original vaccination was given. So you need to kind of look at that to see how long it lasts. Would be one way we could judge that characteristic, perhaps. Okay, as far as observability, usually results are going to occur within 3 days. Now, the only downfall to that is if an animal is already down or sick, your immune system is not going to be boosted as high, and so therefore they're going to struggle with getting, with developing that immunity. So when that vaccine is given, it might vary depending on vaccines as far as how many days it takes before the animal is considered inoculated. One interesting thing I wanted to come back and touch on was the intrauterine vaccine. Although that would be relatively expensive, it does show the value in bringing that vaccine into your program. I know that recently when they were looking at the PPLO vaccine for sheep, they did go ahead and inoculate intrauterine, and they found that those animals that were born on the ground and inoculated to the Pasteurella disease, which can be really devastating to an animal's health if they do develop that as a result of stress. It certainly made a believer out of me when I heard those facts. Simply because I know now that I can give that at 3 days, and it does that good of, it takes effect that quick in the body. It definitely made me quick to adopt. Okay, now let's talk about the constraints and consequences. Although we talked about as far as the constraints, some restraints are required. Exposure can lead to illness. We talked about how when you vaccinate, if the animal has already become infected, or if the animal's immune system is weakened as a result of maybe a respiratory infection, or something's going on with their immune system, then they can become ill as a result of you giving that vaccine. So that would be a constraint. A consequence, however, when I look at this as if you do not vaccinate in your program, what else could happen? When you're talking about bioterrorism, that is something that quickly we all need to be taking note of. For example, ever since 9/11, if terrorists are to enter an area that is not currently vaccinating for something, and they could quickly go into a feedlot and swab the muzzles of several calves that were going in 4 or 5 different locations the next day, we could have mass spreading of that particular virus just overnight. And so as a result of that, we need to be aware of the need for vaccinations simply as a consequence to bioterrorism. And besides that, just the economical impact that it can have on your program. If you're not vaccinating for a particular disease, then loss can occur. And that, of course, would outweigh the mortality costs. So when you're looking at the price of vaccine versus the loss, that's going to be an easy choice to make for adoption. Just wanted to bring note that in some places where vaccination is not required and an outbreak occurs, whether it be a third world country or not, you can have devastating loss, and kind of we can evolve backwards into our old way of thinking, whereas the solution for this particular disease is to quarantine and kill, no matter if they're diseased or healthy. And so as a result, I think it's very important to see that this innovation is something that not only historically has made an impact, but as we evolve in the future, you can see the new vaccines that are coming about are going to have the need for adoption just as much so as that we did many years ago. So because of that, I picked this innovation thinking that not only is it historical, but it's very recent as far as the latest and greatest vaccines that have come about. So it might not be considered as much of an innovation as an intervention. Either way, I definitely think it's something that all producers need to be involved in. That concludes our program for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at anorris@ssisd.net. Thanks for your time.